And just finally, Diane Abbott said nothing was moral about your proposed benefit cuts for what might be £5 billion of savings. Your backbenchers are finding it increasingly uncomfortable to vote for and say it's not really what they got into politics for. Do you have sympathy with them? Are you completely comfortable with these changes, potentially taking benefits away from 1 million vulnerable people?
I've lived all my life with the impact of disability through my mum, who was very ill all of her life, and more recently my brother, who recently died of cancer. So I do understand the concerns, but I do think it's morally indefensible that 1 million young people are going essentially from education onto benefits. They're not in work, they're not in education, they're not in training. All of the evidence shows that if young people are in that position so early in their lives, they're going to find it really difficult ever to get out of that. I don't think that is morally defensible. Nor do I think it's morally defensible to have a system that makes it really difficult for people who are out of work to get into work. Government should be helping people to get into work if that's what they want to do. We've got a system that does the complete opposite. That is not defensible. And there aren't many people who genuinely argue that the status quo is working. We've got 2 million people on benefits because of sickness. That's going to go up to 3 million, 4 million by the end of this government. We can't just shrug our shoulders and pretend that it's progressive to watch millions more people go on to disability benefits when they could, and many of them want to be in work. And that's why it's so vital that we carry out these reforms.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer's shameless defence of his government's plan to rip an unprecedented $5 billion from the incomes of disabled people is a staggering display of cold-blooded political calculation, utterly devoid of empathy or principle. It is not merely a policy decision. It is a deliberate, brutal assault on those already at the sharpest edge of hardship, a signal that the most vulnerable in society are expendable in the eyes of Starmer's administration. To justify stripping billions from people who are already struggling to survive is beyond callous. It is morally obscene. Starmer, who once postured as a champion of fairness and justice, now stands exposed as nothing more than a hollow operator, willing to sacrifice dignity, humanity, and Labour's foundational values at the altar of fiscal optics and political expediency. He cloaks himself in technocratic language, spinning these cuts as necessary or pragmatic, but no amount of carefully worded press releases can mask the sheer cruelty of targeting disabled people, those least able to weather such an assault. What makes this even more grotesque is the fact that these cuts aren't being made from positions of strength or necessity, but from cowardice and convenience. Rather than challenging the wealthy, the powerful, the corporations hoarding obscene profits, Starmer chooses to balance the books on the backs of disabled citizens, people at the highest risk of poverty, exclusion, and social isolation. It is an act not of leadership, but of betrayal. And for him to stand in front of cameras, straight-faced, defending this policy without even the decency to acknowledge the suffering it will cause, reveals a man utterly detached from the human cost of his ambition. Keir Starmer has become the embodiment of a politics that sees compassion as weakness, solidarity as an inconvenience, and the vulnerable as collateral damage. History will not remember the sound bites. It will remember that, when given the choice, Starmer chose to side with austerity and cruelty, cutting $5 billion from those who had the least, and defending it without shame.
I mean, you're saying that they're smashing down the road, knocking off the wing mirrors. They're smashing down the road, demolishing the cars and the houses and ripping the street apart. Because this is the thing I don't understand. As I said, I wrote about this. Just to reiterate, Rachel Reeves has said her priority is stimulating growth. Now, I'm not. This isn't a political point I'm about to make. If we have a chancellor who thinks the way you stimulate growth is to simultaneously load £40 billion of taxes on business, introduce a huge new framework of red tape and workplace regulation. To say to British businesses, you have to get to a point where you have zero emissions in net terms, and simultaneously start to slash public spending. If you think that is how to stimulate growth, it's not. You know, I don't go with this. It's not Rachel from accounts. It's Rachel from the madhouse.
Yeah.
It's Rachel from the loony bin. This is not going to work.
Right. But also, she spent months, didn't she?
Basic. You know, even the most junior economic student knows that is not how you can possibly stimulate growth.
And she is an economist after all, so she should know better. But
Dan Hodges' cutting remark, describing the Chancellor as Rachel from the madhouse rather than Rachel from accounts, perfectly encapsulates the sheer absurdity and recklessness at the heart of Rachel Reeves' economic agenda. What was once marketed as sober, responsible fiscal stewardship, the image of a careful accountant balancing the books with precision, has now descended into a chaotic, ideologically driven frenzy where the only strategy seems to be slashing public spending without foresight, empathy, or basic economic sense. This isn't the cool, collected technocrat she once styled herself as. Instead, Reeves now resembles someone utterly detached from reality, making decisions that are as self-destructive as they are socially devastating. Her planned cuts, packaged under the guise of economic prudence, reveal a dangerous willingness to gut public services, punish the working class, and deepen inequality, all while pretending it's some kind of responsible governance. The truth is, Reeves' approach is not rooted in sound economic thinking, but in a warped obsession with appeasing markets and pandering to austerity rhetoric, no matter the cost to ordinary people. Dan Hodges' brutal quip is not simply an offhand insult. It exposes the underlying chaos and ideological madness of her position. Because what else do you call it when a chancellor, faced with a cost of living crisis, crumbling public services, and soaring inequality, chooses to tighten the screws on the very people already struggling? This is not accountancy. This is economic vandalism dressed up in spreadsheets and pie charts. It's a deranged adherence to outdated dogma, and the consequences will be felt not in boardrooms, but in classrooms, hospitals, and homes across the country. Reeves may think she's presenting herself as the sensible one, but in reality, she's piloting the ship straight into the iceberg, grinning as she slashes budgets and pretends it's all under control. In the end, Hodges is right. This is not going to work. It's not responsible. It's not rational. It's chaos masquerading as competence. And Rachel Reeves is not the accountant. She's the arsonist lighting the match under the very foundations of the society she claims to serve.